Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today's case takes us to the vast and prosperous land of Australia, a place where many people around the world dream of settling. A wealthy Chinese couple was living happily there, but an unexpected turn of events occurred. While the husband was temporarily back in China, the wife and her mother were suddenly attacked, leading to a murder right below their apartment. This tragic incident turned into a complex case for the police forces of both countries. On September 30th, 2010, at 7:30 p.m., a 27-year-old Chinese woman named Dan Sun was driving back to her apartment in the Balga area of Perth. Her 53-year-old mother, Jishan Kang, was also in the car. Dan Sun was on her way to pick up her daughter, who was playing at her grandmother's house. As she parked, she noticed a car blocking her from the front and another car approaching from behind, blocking her exit. Finding this strange, Dan Sun asked her mother to step out and see what was going on. As soon as Jishan Kang got out of the car, a strong, dark-skinned man with long hair jumped out of the front car, armed with a spear gun. He fired at her, but she instinctively dodged the shot, causing the spear to lodge in a neighbor's apartment. After missing his target, the attacker immediately grabbed a hammer from his car and charged at Jishan Kang, repeatedly striking her on the head. Severely injured and unconscious, she fell to the ground. The assailant then went to the driver's seat, smashed the car window with the hammer, opened the door, and repeatedly stabbed Dan Sun. He then quickly drove away. After neighbors reported to the police, authorities arrived at the scene to find Dan Sun deceased in the driver's seat. Her mother, Jishan Kang, was lying on the ground next to the car, unconscious from severe head injuries inflicted by a hammer. Medical personnel immediately transported her to the hospital for emergency care. Due to the secluded location of Dan Sun's apartment, there was limited surveillance in the area. Only a neighbor's camera captured footage of a suspicious vehicle. Investigations revealed that a witness had seen a white sedan parked across from the victim's house for about 2 hours. When Dan Sun and her mother drove home, the sedan quickly started and blocked their car. Another vehicle, a gray 2-seater Mercedes-Benz CLK sports car, stopped in front of Dan Sun's car. The witness also saw the perpetrator from the side, but could not identify them as they were disguised. Upon reviewing the surveillance footage, police identified the owner of the white sedan at the crime scene as Nuo Zhao, Dan Sun's estranged husband. Further investigation revealed that Dan Sun and Nuo Zhao were in the process of divorcing and currently separated. Police immediately searched Nuo Zhao's residence and discovered a spear gun matching the witness's description. Consequently, he became the prime suspect. However, just as the police were preparing to issue a warrant, Nuo Zhao's immigration records showed that he had returned to his home country 2 weeks prior, providing him with a solid alibi. This development left the police astounded. Could the real perpetrator be someone else? The police shifted their investigation to Dan Sun's social relationships. The findings revealed that her social circle was very small. Apart from running her nail salon and attending English classes, she did not have any conflicts with anyone. In light of this, the police refocused their investigation on her husband, Nuo Zhao. Despite his alibi, could Nuo Zhao have hired a hitman? At the age of 30, Nuo Zhao hailed from Liaoning. His father was the head of logistics at a university in Liaoning. His uncle was a standing committee member of the Liaoning Provincial Party Committee, and his mother, Song Tibei, owned a construction company. This made his family both wealthy and influential locally. Nuo Zhao was a true playboy, having grown up in luxury. His father and Dan Sun's father were colleagues, which facilitated their marriage. After obtaining Australian citizenship, Nuo Zhao lived comfortably. He enjoyed diving and spearfishing. Nuo Zhao owned 3 properties worth over 10 million yuan, approximately 1.4 million USD, and had a Mercedes-Benz convertible. Additionally, he ran 2 import-export companies in Australia. However, his official job in Australia was as a part-time security guard, and he frequently patrolled the community with his hunting dog. Through the investigation, police discovered that Nuo Zhao was suspected of renting a house in the northeastern area of Perth. He was running a front for a massage parlor, which actually provided adult services with Asian women. Nuo Zhao frequently visited this place and was close friends with the manager. After the incident, the manager told the police, "Nuo Zhao is a good person, and his wife Dan Sun is also a good friend of mine." In April 2008, Nuo Zhao and Dan Sun held their wedding at the Perth International Exhibition Centre. Despite Dan Sun being Nuo Zhao's second wife, the couple enjoyed a sweet period together. Neighbors often saw them walking their dog and driving their sports car around. Although Dan Sun's family background was not as affluent as Nuo Zhao's, it was still quite respectable. Growing up in wealth, both Nuo Zhao and Dan Sun had somewhat selfish personalities. Over time, living together, their flaws began to surface, and they often quarreled over trivial matters. After their daughter was born, their disagreements escalated due to differing parenting views. During this period, Nuo Zhao's mother, Song Tibei, naturally sided with her son. Dan Sun, having been spoiled from a young age, could not tolerate grievances. Her assertive nature often displeased her mother-in-law. The strained relationship between Dan Sun and Song Tibei, along with the marital discord, led to frequent conflicts. On one occasion, Dan Sun and Song Tibei even had a physical altercation over child-rearing issues. When Nuo Zhao learned about this, he became increasingly resentful of Dan Sun. In April 2010, Dan Sun filed for divorce in the Perth court. Following her request, the court froze Nuo Zhao's assets in Australia as per the legal requirements, until the divorce and asset division were finalized. Shortly after, Dan Sun moved out of their mansion with her daughter and rented an apartment in the Balga area. A few days later, on her lawyer's advice, Dan Sun began investigating Nuo Zhao's misconduct during their marriage, hoping to secure custody of their daughter and a larger share of the assets. Somehow, Nuo Zhao became aware that Dan Sun was gathering evidence against him. This struck a nerve, as he was fully aware of his own dubious activities. If things took a turn for the worse, he risked losing not only his wife and child, but also most of his family's assets and custody rights. This intensified his resentment toward Dan Sun. However, it's important not to jump to conclusions and assume that Nuo Zhao was the perpetrator of the crime. With the continuous turmoil and intense conflicts over the divorce, Dan Sun might have sensed something was wrong. To reduce the tension, she decided to take her daughter back to her home country temporarily. Unexpectedly, one day her young daughter was kidnapped by a stranger from their neighborhood. Dan Sun was devastated and extremely distraught. On her family's advice, she sought help from the Australian Embassy and the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Eventually, the investigation revealed that her daughter had been taken back to Perth and was staying with her mother-in-law. Dan Sun immediately bought a ticket and flew back to Australia to reunite with her daughter. Considering these facts, the Perth police wondered if Nuo Zhao's family, already having acted irrationally over custody disputes, could have gone further and committed murder. The police continued their investigation and discovered that on September 24, 2010, Nuo Zhao had posted a job advertisement in a Chinese-language newspaper in Sydney. The ad was seeking a driver to travel across Australia from Sydney to Perth with a generous compensation. Strangely, immigration records showed that Nuo Zhao had been in China visiting relatives since September 10th. Hiring a driver in Sydney while being in China seemed illogical. Following this lead, the police began investigating along the highway from Sydney to Perth based on the ad's information. This route spans approximately 4,000 kilometers, nearly crossing the entire country. Even driving non-stop, the journey would take about 2 days. Upon reviewing reports of unusual vehicle sightings in September, investigators discovered a peculiar photo. The records noted that on the night of September 30th, just hours after the murder, police patrolling the Nullarbor Plain had captured an image. The Nullarbor Plain, bordering South Australia and Western Australia, is a barren, arid region with sparse population. Therefore, anyone driving through this area would need to carry ample food and water. The police discovered that this vehicle had crossed the Nullarbor Plain twice within 1 week. This aroused suspicion, prompting the patrol officers to stop and inspect the car. Under the dim lights, they found 2 stern-faced Asian men inside. After questioning them and verifying their identities, they determined the two had an employer-employee relationship, with the passenger being a man named Yue Mu. Although the inspection revealed nothing unusual, the police took a photo and recorded the encounter for safety. This very photo would later help unveil the horrifying truth behind the case. Upon careful comparison, the police noted that Yue Mu bore a striking resemblance to Dan Sun's husband, Nuo Zhao, confirming they were the same person. Immigration records showed that he entered Australia on September 23, 2010, and left on October 3, which coincided with the timeline of the murder. Through the collaborative efforts of Chinese and Australian police, it was discovered that the man accompanying Nuo Zhao was his friend, who had served as his best man at his wedding. The two men looked remarkably similar in their identification photos. With this information, the police were able to piece together the entire case. The true perpetrator was none other than the man Dan Sun had loved and trusted with her life. Nuo Zhao, a truly ruthless husband, had meticulously planned and executed a scheme to achieve his goal, something few could accomplish. Now, let's recount Nuo Zhao's criminal actions in chronological order. On September 10, 2010, Nuo Zhao used his Australian passport to travel back to China. In Shenyang, he contacted his close friend Yue Mu, who bore a striking resemblance to him, and borrowed his passport. On September 23rd, Nuo Zhao used Yue Mu's passport to leave China and fly to Sydney, Australia. The next day, on September 24th, he placed an advertisement seeking a driver to travel from Sydney to Perth. On September 28th, Nuo Zhao arrived in Perth and prepared the necessary tools for his crime, including a spear gun, a hammer, a knife, and other implements. Using his assumed identity, he purchased a used white car. On the final day, September 30th, Nuo Zhao disguised himself, armed with the weapons, and waited outside the house his wife had rented. At around 7:30 p.m. that evening, he committed the murder, abandoned the purchased car, and joined the hired driver for the return trip to Sydney that same night. After completing everything, on October 3rd, Nuo Zhao used Yue Mu's passport to board a flight back to China. At this point, he believed his perfect crime had been executed flawlessly. If not for the diligent traffic officer who unwittingly took that crucial photo, there's no telling when the case of Dan Sun and Jishin Kong would have been solved. Additionally, on the day of the crime, another surprising detail was recorded. Nuo Zhao's mother, Song Tiabei, had picked up her granddaughter and brought her home. When questioned by the police, Song Tiabei stated, "My son left Perth on September 11th and never returned. He has been in China for over 2 weeks. The last time we spoke was at the end of September when Nuo Zhao called me." Song Tiabei also revealed that during the time she was caring for her granddaughter, she never left the house, and no one visited. However, the police examined a computer at Song Tiabei's home and discovered that Nuo Zhao had logged into a game account 2 days before the crime. Additionally, early on the morning of September 29th, surveillance cameras near the mansion captured images of Nuo Zhao. This confirmed to the police that after arriving in Perth on September 28th, Nuo Zhao had been hiding at his mother's house. The disturbing fact is that on the day of the murder, Song Tiabei not only took her granddaughter away, but also lied to protect her son. In 2016, 6 years after the crime, Song Tiabei was arrested at Perth Airport for harboring a criminal and providing false information to the police. Although Australian police confirmed that Nuo Zhao was the perpetrator of the murder of Dan Sun and her mother due to the absence of an extradition treaty between China and Australia, the Australian authorities could not directly arrest Nuo Zhao. Through the efforts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Interpol, Chinese police arrested Nuo Zhao in April 2012 for the crime of using someone else's passport to leave the country. Until his arrest, Nuo Zhao had been living a luxurious life in China. After murdering his wife, he quickly found a new girlfriend in Shenyang, and the two were inseparable, even traveling together in Southeast Asia. After Nuo Zhao appeared in court, Chinese police located this woman. When identifying the photos used as evidence, she unexpectedly exposed Nuo Zhao's vile and shameless behavior. She told the police that she had worked for Nuo Zhao's company. After they started dating, she soon became pregnant. Initially, Nuo Zhao and his family were overjoyed, but she later suffered a miscarriage. Following this incident, her boyfriend's family's attitude changed drastically. On the very afternoon of her miscarriage, they demanded that she return to work immediately, dismissing her condition as insignificant and threatening to fire her if she did not comply. This naive woman, had also lent Nuo Zhao 20,000 yuan, which he promised to repay. However, after his arrest, his family outright refused to acknowledge the debt. The most tragic part was that, since Nuo Zhao's arrest, numerous women had approached her, accusing her of having seduced him. Ultimately, she was forced to flee and live far away. Additionally, Yue Mu, the close friend who lent Nuo Zhao his passport, tried to inquire about the situation after the crime occurred, only to be berated by Nuo Zhao's family. They accused him of implicating himself by showing concern. In the early stages of his arrest, Nuo Zhao, when interrogated by the police, did not mention the crime, but repeatedly talked about his two unhappy marriages. Just 1 year after marrying Dan Sun, the couple began to have conflicts, exacerbated by interference from both sets of parents. When Dan Sun filed for divorce in 2010, Nuo Zhao saw it as an escape. Unlike his previous quick divorce, Dan Sun was gathering evidence of his wrongdoing. Nuo Zhao was extremely angry, not only because he might lose custody of his child and most of his assets, but more importantly, because it made him feel an unprecedented sense of failure and humiliation. Consequently, Nuo Zhao resolved to deal with the issue decisively in his own way. In a peculiar turn of events, while in custody, Nuo Zhao requested that his family send him a Bible to show repentance, but they instead sent him How the Steel Was Tempered. Their intention to appeal by any means necessary was blatantly clear. Speaking of this, it's clear that Nuo Zhao's brutal behavior cannot be separated from his family's influence. They valued money, were selfish, looked down on women, were harsh with others, and lenient with themselves. Growing up in such a dysfunctional family, it's not surprising that Nuo Zhao's actions turned out this way. Finally, in January 2016, after 5 years of joint investigation by Chinese and Australian police, Nuo Zhao confessed in a Shanghai court. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for premeditated murder. At that moment, Dan Sun's father, Sun Jiayu, expressed relief, believing that Nuo Zhao had received the punishment he deserved. Although there was no extradition treaty in place, China had the right to prosecute since the victim was a Chinese citizen. Nuo Zhao probably never anticipated that the assets he tried so hard to retain would be auctioned off by the Australian government according to the law. The proceeds were overseen by a charity organization to establish a fund. This fund was set up to support Dan Sun and Nuo Zhao's daughter. Not long after, the girl was adopted by a police couple appointed by the government. Later, this couple even took the girl back to Shenyang to visit her bedridden grandparents. Currently, Dan Sun's daughter is still living with this police couple in Australia. They have opened a new chapter in her life, looking toward a brighter future. Dear viewers, in life, there is a saying, when romance ends, kindness should prevail. Perhaps things wouldn't have come to this if Nuo Zhao had known how to let go and stop. It was his greed and ambition that led him to lose everything he valued more than love, his material possessions and honor. Now he has paid a very high price. Do you think someone like Nuo Zhao deserves to be called father by his daughter? Perhaps you already have the answer. And with that, we conclude our video. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more content like this, please click on the thumbnail on the screen. For now, goodbye and see you next time.